You know, a lot of times today we hear people say things like, you can't judge me, or don't judge me, or I'm in charge of my life, so keep your judgments to yourself. I mean, even you and I, honestly, if we're really honest, we think that sometimes. I mean, when was the last time somebody said something to you and told you were doing something wrong and sinful, and you didn't bristle in defiance, at least thinking, what? You can't say that. I mean, whenever you guys argue with your parents or about something that they say that you did wrong and you are disagreeing with them, you're basically saying that they shouldn't be judging you. And you know, in a sense, that's right. No human can judge you. Now, don't jump to conclusions when I say that. Let me explain. Think about it from the perspective of if there was actually no God. If there was no God who is sovereign over this universe, then there is no moral standard that is the ruler that we can use to judge the actions of human beings and say this is wrong and this is right. If there is no God, there's no standard by which we can judge people. Now, of course, you and I and all Christians know that there is a God who has given us the standard. And in fact, that standard is the God himself because his laws flow from his being. He is sovereign over the universe, as the plagues that we just studied showed us. And that means that he makes the rules. Yet even with his laws, as humans, we still technically cannot judge one another. I mean, we're not the ones who made the laws, so we're not the ones who judge. Even when we tell people, and we can tell people that God has said certain things are wrong and certain things are right. But when we do that, it's really God being the one who judges them through his law and through his word, not us. You see, God is really the only judge. Even judges in our court system only have that authority because God gives it to them by instituting government as one of the ways that God rules over humanity. Read Romans chapter 13 for that. But judges do not have the authority in themselves. Your parents have authority over you to judge you and to convict you of sin. But they have that because God has given it to them. The elders of this church have authority over the members of this church only because God has given it to us. God is the judge. And that's what Pharaoh and Egypt learned in this part of the story in Exodus chapters 11 and 12. We're just going to read a few verses, though. We're going to read verses 4 and 5 of chapter 11. Moses said, "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle." So God is standing as judge over Egypt. And he's saying, you have sinned. You have enslaved my people. You have murdered their sons, and you are keeping them from worshiping me. Now here's the judgment that I am placing on you. All the firstborn shall die. Now that sounds harsh to us at times, and it also sounds a little bit odd. Why the firstborn? Why not the rulers like Pharaoh and his family? Or if we're judging across Egypt, why not all the individuals? Why the firstborn? Well, you see, God's choice of the firstborn in the story is not arbitrary. You see, it's something that their culture would have understood very clearly, but we don't really get anymore. Kids, we live in a radically individualistic culture where we think the individual is the master of their fate and my actions only affect me. That's not the way that many, or really even most, other cultures in history and even in the world today see it. In the cultures of Moses' time, and even many cultures today, there were no individual aspirations for success, but only the success of your family. There was no hope of being isolated from the fate of your family or your fate not affecting your family. If one member of the family was shamed, the whole family bore that shame. If one member of the family is honored, the whole family benefits from that honor. Yet in cultures like Moses' and Pharaoh's of the time, it goes even further, particularly with the firstborn. You see, it was in the firstborn that the family placed their hopes. The firstborn represented the family, and all their hopes rested on the success of the firstborn. If the family was to prosper, the firstborn had to prosper. If the family was judged, the firstborn bore that judgment. That's why God judges the firstborn. He's actually judging the sin of all the families of Egypt. And they would see that judgment carried out on the death of the firstborn as the representatives of the families. God is showing clearly here that he is judge, that all the lives of the Egyptians and the Hebrews belong to him. He alone has the right to judge. And you know, youth, that is still true today as much as it was 3,500 years ago. We may like to think that we're masters of our own fate and no one can judge us, but no matter how much we think that, God still can. That's because he is the God who is there, who establishes the standard, who is sovereign over all of this. And we have two choices. We can either submit to him and be blessed, or oppose him and be judged. Yet I don't want to leave you with just that until tomorrow, because that's kind of a hard place to be left. You see, in this story, we also are pointed to Jesus, as we'll see over the next several devotions, because Jesus is the judge, the one who will actually execute the judgment, as the New Testament tells us. Yet what happened on the cross? Jesus stood trial and took our judgment there, took the judgment our sin deserved. So if you are trusting in him, the judge you will face is the very one who has already stood trial in your place. You guys think about that, and I'll see you tomorrow.